And welcome to another exciting after show for the Partially Examined Life. Today is episode 118, and I'm going to be co-hosting with Mark today. Mark, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you, Danny?
I'm doing fine here in sunny California, Los Angeles specifically. I know we have some people here from California who are not from Los Angeles, but here in Los Angeles, it is a sunny day. And where tell the people where you are.
I'm in Madison, Wisconsin, and it's a sunny day here. I think that's enough to generalize that it's a sunny day everywhere. Uh, but let's go around quick.
All right.
Actually, I want to hear from folks. So say who you are, say where you're calling from, and most of the people on here are in a band or something, and I drafted you specifically to be able to talk about that. So
Well,
say
it's
that. Let's start with Chris.
Oh yeah, so I'm Chris Mola, and I am speaking to you from Ojo Caliente, New Mexico. And
And
yes, and so yes, so I was also in Camper Van Beethoven.
okay,
Yes.
a founding member, but no
Founding member.
longer. You said,
I
I
haven't.
won't be on a major label. Screw that. That would be selling out. Get out of there.
Right, yes, harkening back to the earlier conversation, yeah.
stepped away from the spotlight, but he's still here today.
Yes, yeah, working steady.
And now you do kids' music mostly, right?
Well, I do. Well, I've done, yes, a lot of kids' music, and I teach a lot. I work with kids. Right now, I'm actually teaching in public schools here in New Mexico, and in Santa Fe. And I've also done some sound design and music for some big theater projects over the last couple of years. So that's been another big exit.
Right. And then Chase, whose stuff I have been listening to just today.
Oh, thanks.
Where are you calling from?
Yeah, so I'm here in Atlanta, technically Loganville, which is in about halfway in between Atlanta and Athens, Georgia. So, but
Your project is Golden Bear, is that right?
it's just a side name, a nickname that I use to post stuff. Once I actually physically release everything, I'll have it under my own name. But yeah, so I've played in bands since I was a teenager, high school and college, and these days I pretty much just keep to myself and write my own music, solo, singer-songwriter, folk type stuff.
And immaculate sounding recordings, I gotta say.
Oh, thank you.
Adrian, I don't know anything about you. Tell us where you are and who you are.
Hi, yeah, sorry, I've been coming in and out because of my computer's being silly, but I think it's sorted out. Yeah, my name's Adrian. I usually go by Cho, so my last name is Cho. I'm in Dallas, and it's also very sunny here. Very, very hot day.
As it should be. As it should be.
Oh, I want to go back to Michigan. It's too hot. Musically, let's see. I'm not in any bands, but I sing with Dallas Symphony Chorus, and
Nice.
I play piano and classical guitar. So I'm more from like the classical tradition. I'm trying to learn some jazz, etc.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Good representation here. And then Mr. Michael Patrick Wilson. Yes, you're
Unmute.
muted.
Yes, I'm trying to unmute.
You're supposed to be the tech guy.
Well,
All right, tell us your deal.
there we go. Hey, yes, my name is Mike Wilson. I live in the East Bay in Northern California near San Francisco where the weather is perfect. And I was
By definition.
it's almost always perfect. And I was trying to think of the first time I collaborated with Mark Linsenmeyer, who lived down the dorm from me my freshman year, 25 years ago. And yeah, 25 years of collaborating once every 7 or 8 years or something. I don't know. But yes, Mark was one of the first musical people I ran into when I started at the University of Michigan a long time ago.
It's nearly 4 collaborations. every 70.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's
right.
probably about the size of it. We did one gig together, I remember,
Yeah.
at a coffee house, and there was a lot of swearing in the song, and people walked out. At least one angry old man, not like our swearing, stormed out of the coffee shop.
So we're all musicians here, pretty much.
One form or another, yeah.
That was the idea. When I advertised this, I sort of I was a little heavy-handed about that. I was afraid I was afraid we'd be full. Besides which, since we're not going to be talking about Nietzsche or something, I didn't think there would be just any random non-music bands.
Well, I am trying to get a Nietzsche mustache going, but it's not very successful. So
You can do it.
I see we might have on the call Warren Fisher. Can you hear us, Warren?
Yeah, I'm working.
I think he can hear us, but we can't hear him.
Okay, hold on.
All right. Oh,
Okay.
I heard that.
Nearly there. I don't know what's going on.
Thank you very much. Oh, hey guys, can you hear me now?
Yes.
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 Okay, really sorry about that.
Warren Fisher. Does anybody else on the call know that name to know what band he's from?
Oh
It
boy,
begins with Fisher.
it's a pretty obscure band.
Fisher Spooner. Anyway, this is a band that I had heard of, and then he was following me, or we were connected on Facebook for 2 years before I realized that I knew this guy's band, and I had CDs sitting on my shelf. So we've been conversing today about how horribly sentimentalist the folks on the call were, and neglecting electronic music, which is Fisher Spooner's starting point. But I think we should maybe before we should let Chris have the opening volley as a band member of the guys, former band member of the guys we interviewed. What did you hear in the discussion that made you say, "You stupid bastards," or have any other reactions?
No, it was good. I actually listened to. I was able to listen to a little more than half of the discussion, and yeah, I think there's some really good good issues that got brought up. You know, particularly around internet commerce and music, and we're all confronting that, and part of my take on it is. Well, I think some of the conditions are becoming kind of more and more severe. Where, you know, a lot of the wealth that's being generated is getting sucked up by fewer and fewer people. I have kind of a 'twas ever thus sort of attitude about it. I mean, art and commerce have always been, or art and the economy have always been in this tension, and all the famous dead white guy musicians, composers were employees, for the most part, for a very long time. They had to be employees of somebody, a wealthy person, and so it's, I don't think that tension is ever going to go away, and it's, as artists, a lot of us nowadays, we have to straddle both. We have to have a foot in both. In both areas, we have to, because we're in a position where we have to manage our own economic survival. We can't just sign on the bottom line and get a big advance to make a bunch of records. So there's definitely a trade-off, because in the heyday of all that stuff, you sign on the bottom line, you got a big advance, but then you're on the hook for the rest of your life for however many albums, and the company had all the power. So it's sort of the next version of that same battle that we probably always have to, artists will probably always have to fight.
Anybody want to run with that?
I have thoughts on that topic. So completely agree that there's always a strange dynamic between art and commerce. What I found interesting about the discussion that you guys had was there was, again, nostalgia for a time when music was limited and it was difficult to access it. I remember living in Madison, there were a few record stores, and I would buy anything that was in the genres of music that I could find. And I was desperate for access to music. And we now have getting closer to unlimited access, which I think is an amazing thing for listeners and musicians alike. So I do think there's an irony in the fact that we all liked it better when you had to put music onto a vinyl platter, and that process was something inaccessible to people, so that was the leverage point with which to charge money for it, which ultimately trickled down to artists. But that was just a temporary technological sort of moment in the way the history of recorded music operated. But it's interesting that musicians are nostalgic for that. As for, I think musicians just want to get paid, somehow. And that's what it boils down to. And everybody wants to make a living doing what they want to do. And but I think for somebody who's into more, sort of obscure music, the renaissance that's happening right now is mind-blowing, the things that you can get access to. I mean, I remember when I lived in Chicago in the early 90s, again, after Madison, I would get paid on Friday, and I would travel by train to 5 different record stores. And it was virtually every payday, and I'd get a stack of records, and half of them were really shitty, and that was just the process by which I discovered music. So anyway, you could argue that things are way better, is my point.
It's interesting when we talk about music being split up and get basically the user experience. Me and everybody on my block could be listening to a different band, and none of us could have ever heard of any of them, and so on. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a comedian who his act, a lot of it is spoofing songs, that people listen to. So he said he thinks it's getting to the point where he can't do it anymore because not everybody knows the same songs like they used to, which is a good thing and it's a bad thing because there was something that that kind of brought people together by having access to the same few songs where we could all wind up singing together on something. It was something that united us. But what are people's take on that?
Well, the nostalgia of the '60s came up in the original podcast where we were talking about how that was a time of great artistic breakthroughs and things like that. But the '60s to me always seemed like a winner-take-all thing. I mean, like the winners of that would fly their helicopter down to the pub, and there's all kinds of rock and roll. That's when rock and roll excess was born, and I think things got unified so much that it turned into kind of such a concentration at the top where everybody was unified, but they all liked the same handful of bands who turned into trillionaires, which contrasted with now, it's the absolute opposite where musicians don't get paid at all. But yeah, I found it a little weird. Like the nostalgia for the '60s is as if it wasn't commercial. It was intensely commercial. I mean, if you watch the Peanuts Christmas special, Snoopy in the '60s was complaining about, or someone was complaining about Snoopy going commercial or something like that. So I mean, that complaint existed back then, and in a way, I think it was almost. I mean, that's when the commerciality really took hold, in my opinion.
Well, I'll respond to that by saying that even though I came across an article recently that the music business is down. I don't know what the exact numbers are, so I'm going to misquote this, but it was something like the industry generated in 2000, it generated like $25 billion, and now it's generating $13 billion. So it's gone way down, but there's still, I would argue that that's still alive, that there's still your Beyoncés, there's still your Jay-Z's, and there's still your Miley Cyruses, and there's a level at which you can make a ton of money. I just think there's fewer people in that. It's sort of like the middle class of musicians. So in a way, I'm kind of disagreeing. I would say there used to be more of a middle class because everybody had to purchase their music at all different levels. And so now the middle class is gone, and there's just the extremely rich. But I do, obviously there were a lot of excesses, and there was a lot of money to be made through selling records in the 70s particularly. So, you're right about that. One point I will say that I love about the 60s is it went from, kind of hokey rock and roll all the way to Black Sabbath. And you have to think about there was Motown, the Beatles, and Rolling Stones and all kinds of different versions of hard rock like Cream and everything. There was a lot of just creativity there. So anyway, just on a side note, that was more of a side note. I do appreciate the '60s for that.
A thought I had that I would turn over quite a bit, not so much recently, but a few years ago, is the way music was proliferating via through the internet and so forth, and mass culture in the way that we've been talking about it was sort of breaking down with less direct industry control. You had this phenomenon where live music was becoming more important again, because you can't. It's harder to, for instance, it's harder to make money through recordings, and so whereas a band used to tour in order to support record sales, now they're giving the recordings away for free to get people to come to shows, and so you have this kind of weird flip in how some aspects of the music economy work, and in a way, it's kind of a return to a time, perhaps before recording and before all that technology
Exactly.
control, where live music matters, and it matters to a smaller group that have your audience that you have to cultivate. Of course, the big difference is now your audience might be scattered all over creation, and you can't speak to them all at one concert, or you can't play in one place and have your whole audience come together. It's different that way, but you're working to cultivate this group of people, and it's not possible to try and reach a mass audience just because there's such a volume of stuff to choose from. But you can reach the people who you can connect more directly with the people who do like what you do and do respond to it.
I'm almost amazed that touring still exists, given the technology that we now have at our disposal. And it seems like it's only a matter of time before, can I set up do a band rehearsal and film it with our holographic projectors and stream the result over the internet. So you could have a virtual gig without touring anymore,
Right.
and it would be basically certainly probably more pleasant than being in a smelly bar.
Right.
You were talking about this in the episode. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, please go ahead.
Mark, just the idea of live performance has this certain. I'm trying to remember the word that you. You were talking about the perception of authenticity, I believe, and in that conversation you talked about live performance and the effect that live performance has versus recorded performance. Do you remember that?
I know that was something that Victor was very concerned about.
Anyway,
even when he did the recordings, that trying to do it as live as possible, so that would have some authenticity for it. I'm more. I think musicians themselves tend to overestimate how much listeners care about the musician point of view. In other words, a guitarist might be, look, I'm doing an extra fancy thing on guitar, but only other guitarists are really going to appreciate how cool this thing I'm doing on guitar is. And likewise, like a friend of mine that was in a band with me used to say, I like to hear songs where I can really picture, where they don't do a lot of extra overdubbing, because I want to be able to kind of picture all of the musicians doing their thing. And so if you layer 9 layers of vocals or whatever on it, there's something that just fell flat for him about that. But again, that's only from somebody who's either a musician themselves or maybe really immersed in the culture of watching live music. Might be fans that are like that, but I'm not one of those. Like I think the listener, from the listener point of view, they don't really care. Like the sounds have to be cool, but as to it sounding like it's live or something,
I think there's a connection you build with the performer by seeing them live. Like you're like, you know what? I was in the same room with that person. They're real. That person exists. They're alive. We were there. We experienced this together.
Yeah, and my information is, despite what you're saying, Mark, that touring, that's the area of the business that's growing. And that these are undownloadable experiences. Yeah, people are
Uh-huh.
experimenting with live YouTube broadcasts, but touring, like the company that owns Coachella and GovBall and other festivals, like the company that owns those two is now doing record deals. And what they do is they give you a deal that actually makes sense, which is, we're going to book you on these 10 festivals in Europe and 10 festivals in North America. We're going to pre-book you at X dollars per gig, and we're going to give you an advance of like half of that money for you to finish your record, and you're pre-agreeing to go to these festival dates. So the importance of live music is growing. I think people have a fetish for reality, in a sense. And I think that in a world filled with screens and hours and hours and hours of looking at screens, there's a deep desire for that on some basic level. And so, anyway, I think that's where music is actually thriving.
Right. I've
And then, of
noticed.
course,
Oh, I'm sorry. You can
no,
go.
please go ahead.
Chase.
Please.
Oh, well, at least in my experience, I listen to a lot of singer-songwriter, folk, indie type music, and I'd say over the past 5, 6 years, I've noticed a lot more indie musicians going the direction of a DIY house show kind of thing. Um, a lot of acts out of the Pacific Northwest, David Bazan, Damian Gerardo, Rocky Votolato, those kind of guys. They basically just, because we're all so connected with the technology, they'll just send emails out to their fan base, say, hey, we're doing a tour, it's going through these cities. If you want to volunteer, your house will come and do like a 2-hour set. No stages, no backlines, no sound systems, just the artist, their guitar, and a group of people sitting on the floor interacting. So it's kind of gone back to more of I guess more of a primal, immediate kind of thing. I don't know if that's a backlash or if that's just an evolution of where touring has gone. But I've been to a number of those shows, and it's a lot of fun to be able to literally have the person right in front of you and have conversations in between songs. And
that's really interesting. It's cutting out all the middlemen. It almost sounds like Uber for live music, which makes a lot of sense to me. That makes a lot of sense because you can go right to the people and you can negotiate directly, and you can make an exchange.
Exactly.
It really, if you think about the 20th century, that was a century when recorded music was invented, and it was a blip, historically speaking, of when it was very difficult for people to get access to recorded music, and it was really expensive. And now we're reverting back to pre-20th century in one way of looking at it, maybe, where it's like people would travel around and perform, and people would congregate to see live music, and the recorded music becomes kind of like the flyer for those performances. Potentially, this is a possible interpretation.
Well, I was amused when you referred to a desire for reality or real experience as a fetish. I think it seemed to me like it's the other way. The fetishistic part is more the technology stuff. It's the other way around. I mean, being with other people and we're social creatures, so that's something that we miss on a deep level, and the technology, for all its promise of connectivity, a lot of that connectivity is very superficial, and this is the experience that we miss and crave, and are seeking out, partly because of, and I think in no small measure in spite of the technology stands between us.
I always feel like it's kind of like the cloud, everybody puts everything in the cloud. You put your books in the cloud, you put your CDs in the cloud. See, Mark's got all the CDs behind him, but a lot of people put all their albums in the cloud, put your books in the cloud, you put your videos in the cloud, and in my mind it just keeps going that way, right? and eventually you just wind up putting your furniture in the cloud. Everything is in the cloud. Like you wind up, you come home and it's a completely empty house, and then you're just dying for something physical, So like I feel like the one fetish leads to the other. Like Chris, you're talking about the technology. Like the more people are going to get into technology, the less they're going to have the reality, and then
Right.
eventually they're going to crave what they don't have because of the rules of supply and demand. So,
Yeah.
Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought.
that's all I had to say.
Sorry. All that involves a lot of commitment, both from the fan and the artist, to travel around and perform for small audiences. And what I've always wondered is, can you make a living doing that? I mean, can you actually travel around, perform to the 1/100th of 1% of the people in a particular area that are really into you enough to show up with decent chunks of money, and continue doing that? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I've never been like a working paid musician, so I have no idea. But can you actually make a living doing that?
I know. I'm sorry. You can.
I would say I think people do it. It's hard. But
Yeah, just if you're good.
I think there's a lot more to it than being good.
Right.
You have to have the skills to, right, and the chutzpah, should we say, to to kind of push yourself and get out there and make those connections. But see, that's the things like now and this is the thing that is difficult for a lot of musicians who are very good at what they do, is you don't have someone you don't have someone who's taking the cut of what you make and doing it for you. Someone who is all chutzpah and all networking and taking that over. You've got to, and this is what's his name? Jaron Lanier has been writing articles sort of, cautioning us about where a lot of this stuff is going, and where he was describing artists and musicians in particular, in his estimation, they're kind of canaries in the coal mine. It's like the way it's such a scramble, and it's so now everybody has to be their own business person as well as their own maker, and so that's it's tough. You've got to work a lot to do that. I mean, I have a day job, so
Seems like as the technology has expanded, their responsibility in a lot of respects is expanded with that. Whereas
yes.
bands used to just have a manager and a publicity guy, and the label did a lot of the work, and now it's pretty much up to you to be the marketing and the creation process. And
I think the real question nobody's asking is, what is a living? What do you consider a
You
living?
call this living.
Exactly.
Right,
You're doing
indeed.
what you love. I want to bring
Right.
Adrian into this. What is the classical perspective on all this stuff we're talking about? You now represent all of classical music. You.
Right here, right now. Okay, I'll give you the definitive statement.
What do you play?
Classical music. I sing, and I play piano, classical guitar, sort of thing. I wonder. I don't know if I have too much to say about the economics about the classical music. I mean, it's pretty much similar, right? It's tough living for classical musicians as well. And I'm not a professional musician, so I can't tell you that much about it. I do wonder about. I guess this is steering the conversation in a bit of a different direction.
Please.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, please hear us.
Okay. Well, I wonder about authenticity, about in classical music, and when you guys are talking about that on the episode, and because classical musicians mostly play music that's not written by themselves. It's written by other people, and I was wondering whether there's something, inauthentic about that, right? Could you say that? I'm not really sure. I'm just bringing up the question.
Sure you can. Yeah,
Sure.
you can.
I
You
mean,
can definitely say that. And
sure.
and not apologies for A, talking a lot, and B, I'm about to sound like the know-it-all guy with music, so I apologize for that. But so my mother was an opera singer. My best friend in high school, his mother played violin. I grew up playing violin, and she played violin professionally in the Madison Symphony. And so I saw what her life was like and how much money she got. And I'm also aware of how the classical musical world's trending, by the way, just going back to that, which is not good.
Mm.
They're losing money. They're like everybody's like people go to opera are 80 years old. It's a problem. It's a real problem for them. But so that's the point there.
The
Which,
opera should just go to people's houses. They should tour around the
House
country
concerts.
and go.
but as far as playing music that other people wrote, I think that's a really interesting issue. And I think that Yasha Heifetz is not as valuable or expressive as Stravinsky was, who created. And so I think, in my view, there is a hierarchy of value. But it's an interesting exercise because you're interpreting somebody else's expression, and and it applies to symphonies and all forms of classical music. It's what makes jazz so great is that you can't really do that with jazz. It's always combined with the performer really dramatically.
Right.
But yeah, no, I think it is. Now for example, Paganini is a violinist, very incredible violinist from like the 1700s or something. He toured around. He was so good that he had to write his own music. And I think I don't know. I just think there's something more interesting there than somebody who just plays other people's music. But anyway, that's my.
It's like Mark, what you were talking about in the episode about Taylor Swift. I thought that was it. Yeah.
If anything, I didn't want to be the guy who was like defending Taylor Swift too much on the episode, given the people that I was talking to. But given that since my daughter, like that for a while, that was like all she would listen to. So I've heard every Taylor Swift album a lot of times, and I have no problem with it. Like there's definitely the production values did not for me interfere with it being an authentic expression of a 16-year-old girl writing about stuff. Like if that's what you want, it seems to work just fine. But I thought that at least my conclusion at the end of it was this whole authenticity thing. Well, I compared it to being fashionable, and I did not mean that it's just like, oh, shouldn't worry about that. Don't worry about being fashionable. That's stupid. Don't worry about being authentic. That's stupid. I was concerned about it that it's a spectator-related thing rather than a creator-related thing. So I think it's legitimate as a person listening to something to say, is this coming from a person or is this coming from a corporation that put this together to make something to my tastes, imitating people who actually had something to say. Like that is, as a listener, that's important, but as a creator, you already know whether you're a person or a corporation or something. Like it's not even an issue. So it was kind of weird that Victor himself, that had to do with his own progression as somebody who was trying to delve deep into the blues and these other traditional forms, which is kind of a strange foreign thing to me. It's not something that resonates with me that much. I would rather use traditional forms to make something new and crazy, not try to get back to the authentic 1940s stuff. So I was interested to hear about his struggles with that, though I don't ultimately. Well, and I guess there's a question right there that he was taking as his paradigm of authenticity, getting in and playing really old blues numbers, but those are mostly not, those are folk songs often
Right,
going
they're
back
folk
far
songs.
enough.
Right.
Yeah, so you're playing something somebody else wrote. You're playing something maybe the words have been going around the culture for a long time. Like yet you could still think that's authentic. So obviously there are different pictures of authenticity at work here.
Yeah.
Well,
Certainly.
In the case of folk music, folk music is by definition something that belongs to everyone and no one. And so every performance, every version is an authentic version of this thing, this idea that we all recognize and pass around and carry with us. It's something to share, and I think that's I think that musical expression generally, it's like everybody listens. You listen to somebody, you pick up something, you incorporate it into what you do, whether it's literally lifting a sample or learning a lick or inflecting your voice a certain way. We're all that's just part of the process of music as a human activity. It's something we share.
Hey, before we go on, I wanted to acknowledge that we had a late arrival, Max Bartko, who is another
Hi.
guy, along with Michael, that I worked on our evil 12 Days of Christmas thing this last holiday season, which is how I hooked up with Jonathan Sagel in the first place, and why we ended up having this episode. So that's historical.
Thank
Max,
you.
Thank
you for that.
Mostly
Okay,
an
sure.
electronic guy, right, Max? Or what,
I'm sorry. Could you say that one more time?
Electronic. Mostly
Yeah. So I'm an electronic musician. I'm a rapper. I've been a rapper for a long time, actually. But the contributions that I've been putting here are mostly electronic. Yeah.
We got a lot of crap about the episode from people that are into electronic music and rap. And
Interesting.
did you want to channel any of that, or did you not have that reaction?
Well, I mean, I think what really permeated, what permeates my experience with music and was really at work when I was listening to the episode is I also grew up with a kind of indie rock kind of sense of authenticity and looking for the authenticity. And eventually, I was very scarred to realize that all of my tastes were constructed by a corporate machine, that my desires, that what I believed was real, was,
Or at least mediated through it.
I mean, and there's a bizarre kind of authenticity in embracing how constructed you are, which was a part of the industrial movement of the 1980s. And I'm still a little bit lost here. I don't know what to do with that, and especially if you look at art history. There was this idea before, the more Enlightenment humanist kind of art values, where authenticity was something about the self and bringing you to a universal experience. There was this idea of authenticity actually being continuing a tradition and putting as little of yourself in the work as possible.
That's certainly true with a lot of strains of computer music.
I'm not gonna lie.
The composer is actually constructing systems that, once you set to run, actually generate the music for you. And and that was going back as far as Xenakis and people like that were doing that, and all these composers in mid-century were getting into that. And Mozart just wrote music, poor fellow.
I saw the movie. He got in the front with his harpsichord. He smiled at the audience. He wasn't just a writer. He was a performer.
I have a question for Max, though.
Sure.
You mentioned that it bothered you that to learn that your music was arriving via some corporate distribution, was packaged on it. But why did it bother you?
Oh, it bothered me because the whole Mark summed up, I think, the authenticity thing as a listener really well. But I don't think that this ends up going away as when you're a performer. It gets more insidious. The idea that, is this coming from me, or is this coming from a machine? Is this coming from a sort of and it seems pretty straightforward when there is where you have, Iggy Pop, he's this, he's a junkie. He couldn't get a corporation together if he tried, he's just out there, sweating and doing his thing. And then you have a team of suits behind him that are altering the sound and marketing. And it seems, there seems to be this dialectic of authenticity and, kind of corporate values there. Whereas now those suits and the performer are like the same person. There's no, at the end of the day, instead of there being this kind of, I'm not sure if I'm communicating this well, but instead of there being this opposition, a clear opposition between people who are in it for the music and expressing the human experience, and people that are trying to make a buck, those things have collapsed. The thing that isn't like a sort of expression of the human experience is trying to make a buck. Like, trying to make a buck it ends up becoming like a valid expression of the human experience because it's so central to our lives. And so this challenged my own conception, not only as a listener but as a performer. That all the music I grew up with, my Pink Floyd was like a holy relic to me. You know what I mean? And I only really listened to Pink Floyd because my dad showed me Pink Floyd, and my dad heard it on the radio, and my dad didn't understand that Young Lust was a satiric tune, making fun of cock rock, you know what I mean? And just kind of listened to it, for on face value, but he really enjoyed it, and he passed it on to me. And there was a total authentic experience I was having within this extremely mediated realm. And I guess, yeah, the problem is that the feelings I was getting was this, what Schopenhauer is talking about, this sense that art brings you to the universal of humanity. Whereas I'm really dealing with this, like, particular set of trends that was, really in the mid-'70s. Like, fuck.
Well, actually, just because you brought up Pink Floyd, I watched a couple of documentaries recently, and the fact that they describe it, or Roger Waters describes it as their shared goal as a band was to become millionaires. Like, that is what their goal. And this is one of the most sort of creative, artistic bands of the time, and that's sort of why it fell apart, because they became millionaires, and then I don't think I need to write songs anymore.
Okay, they took care of that. Job done.
Yeah. So that disturbed me as a listener, and especially when I started making music and trying to go for the authentic, because I think this is what makes indie rock people abandon indie rock and look for previous traditions like the blues. Or for me, it was, I went even further into mediated land, and I went to hip hop, which is like literally composed of cut up disco breaks at its inception. It's like it's people do make the authenticity argument with hip hop, but it's even harder. Like, it's even harder to sustain.
Is it the lyrical perspective that I'm, whether it's I'm from the streets or whatever you happen to be communicating the rap? But that seems. What about even just surely the instrumentals? Is that even a concern of authenticity? Or is it that am I sampling too much? Is it that kind of question?
Both. There's the question of hip hop's cultural particularity, because if you've noticed, most of the music we're talking about comes from like American black traditions, and eventually is subsumed, like taken away from those traditions, and kind of not really associated with them anymore. The blues, I think, old white dudes; jazz, old white dudes; rock and roll, middle-aged white dudes. You know what I mean? But hip hop has kind of evaded that kind of institutionalization, because it's supposedly associated still with the black experience in America, even though if I go to the hip hop shows in San Francisco, it's a bunch of crunchy granola hippie MCs. You know what I'm trying to say? So there's that, and then there's a whole debate, especially in the 80s and 90s, where there's and in the 2000s, where there's an idea of how to sample authentically. What is an authentic sample? If you sample something that other people had already sampled, is that authentic? Or are you copying people that are you copying their sampling? Like, if I sample the same records that Dr. Dre sampled, that's not an original sample. Or I've heard rappers articulate that if you can only play instruments, if you only fuck with keyboards, if you can only play instruments and you don't know how to use samples, that you're inauthentic. Like, I've heard it from every angle. Every angle. Like, it's crazy. And the thing, like, it's like combing through a metaphysics textbook and being left with the aporia at the end of, like, I don't know what's authentic. Like, I don't know.
Right. Well, authentic sample just sounds like an oxymoron to me, which doesn't mean it's not fine to do, but why trouble yourself? I when I think about when I use samples, I usually use samples and work at the level of notes of the soonest, playing going up and down and putting their instrument to their faces and taking very careful samples so that you can have a bassoon in your computer and make use of it. I mean, I don't know. Questions kind of go away at that point. There's a whole set of
Right.
things to think about.
As long
Right.
as you successfully put the bassoonist out of business.
Well, see, that's the thing. See, here's the thing. If I could afford to hire a bassoonist, I would choose to do that first because I would rather work with a musician. But I can't afford to choose a bassoonist. And where I live, I don't know where I actually. Probably go find one in Santa Fe, but or Albuquerque, but they're miles away, and I couldn't afford to do that, or I would. So that's me. That's my preference. And I still have, for instance, have hesitations about when I'm working on percussion tracks. If I got a song, I think twice, or I hesitate, and I do it anyway, but I end up using something that sounds like a drum kit, but I thought, I don't really have a drummer. I should use sounds that aren't real drum samples. I should make it sound a little electronic. So, I have a moral or an ethical, there's a hiccup for me there. And a lot of times I use it anyway because the electronic stuff is just not right for what I'm trying to do. But if I had a studio and I could afford a drummer, I would bring a drummer in. And so, anyway, I mean, those are things that's how I think about it. But if I'm doing something purely electronic, then, or consciously sampled, I mean, those are not issues.
Yeah, I think in terms of authenticity, I think it kind of might have a two-pronged approach because you would have the authenticity if you're just sitting down with an instrument and creating something, from your own mind, your own will, or whatnot. But I think it also applies to giving your own interpretation of something that could already exist. I know, for example, a few years ago, I was really into finding track stems. Like I know Trent Reznor at one point released like a bunch of Nine Inch Nails individual tracks, and he just encouraged people to mix, and he would give it to you in the different formats that people might need. But even putting your own touch on something that's been pre-recorded already, I think I would definitely consider that to be authentic. It's just in a different vein with a different technology. I know for the most recent record I made, there was a lot of synthetics involved, where we were having to program synths or drums because we were just recording in a bedroom, so we couldn't really get a drummer in there with enough mics, and didn't really know what we were doing enough to record it the way it should sound. But I think a lot of it would just depend on your approach. If you're authentically trying to create something and be innovative, I think a lot of it has to do with your intentions and the approach you take in the process.
Is it possible to be accidentally inauthentic?
Oh, yeah.
I would think so, yeah. I know a lot of my best ideas have come after I've recorded something and I'm playing around in post-production, and then you take something that was a mistake or not what you intended, and it ends up being your favorite part of the production. So.
Or you go through the whole trouble of writing and recording a tune, and then you stop and think, wait a minute, I should check around and make sure that I'm not actually just reproducing something that I heard, like 5 years ago.
Yeah, that's the worst, is when you realize you completely ripped someone off and you didn't even realize it.
Just parallel thinking, right? There's just so much stuff out there at a certain point.
Right. That said, I mean, how many times have you heard something, or a tune, and go, and these two bars of it, it's like, oh, that's also this, and but of course, Twinkle Twinkle and Little Star and ABC are the same song, so that's fine.
It seems fairly.
As long as it's you slobbering the words over it, then you can say it's authentically you. You know, it's that's what
Exactly.
rock and roll is. It's the same freaking three chords or whatever, but
Exactly.
because it's you and not somebody else that's slobbering over it, then it's authentic.
Sure.
Is
Sorry,
newness.
Danny.
Sorry?
Sorry, you were saying something, Danny?
Yeah, no, I was just saying that at a certain point, it's impossible to be completely original or authentic. It's all been regurgitated before, and pretty much what you said. As long as it's coming from your point of view, and you're not blatantly trying to rip somebody off. You're trying to express yourself. You may find that your expression is similar to somebody else's, as long as you're not stealing from somebody. But if you could kill yourself, if you I guarantee you anything you've ever written, if you did some kind of search with some computer algorithm and looked for the keys or the bars or the notes that you wrote, you'll probably find like 10,000 bands that wrote a similar song. So at a certain point, you just have to sort of be honest and come from your point of view, and put out a little piece of your soul, and know that that's also uh, been shaped by everybody else's souls around you. It's all been absorbed into the big universal sponge.
So Danny, I would think it's harder for you as a comedian. I know whenever I think of a new pun, like a stupid name for a product or something, I will always look up the pun, and it's always used. It's always an actual product out there. There's
Right.
at least with that kind of humor. And I guess that's an argument for not having that kind of jokes in your repertoire anymore. If that's something
It is an argument for that. I mean, that's a big point that you just made. What I think is
Yeah.
the comedy that I do now. I just try to make it very much my experience. I talk about stuff that I did personally, that I've been doing, thoughts that I had about what I did or when I was. It's authentic to me. It's what I've been through. It's not, oh, I think I found something clever here. That that stuff has been done. Between George Carlin and playing with the language and uh, I don't even know pun wise who is really good, but uh,
well, but even observational humor. Did you ever notice that? Well, yeah, if you noticed it, probably they have noticed it too. Probably the 10,000 other comedians before you also noticed that thing.
mm,
Well,
yeah,
that's part of the humor. Is the reason it's humorous is because it resonates with people. They also go, oh yeah, I've been there.
Right. So if you're trying to be truly idiosyncratic, then you're searching for something. Then searching for something that resonates is at cross purposes with something idiosyncratic.
Right, and I think you can. I mean, you could look at the popularity of someone like Louis C.K. or Mark Maron. I mean, those are strictly like confessional type. I know we had mentioned confessional type songwriting, but it seems like a lot of their humor comes from that type of expression, and clearly it resonates with a lot of people. So yeah, it's hard to deny that for sure.
Yeah.
yeah. There's always also this like, do you ever notice kind of jokes kind of piss me off sometimes, where it's like, do you ever notice that? Yeah, yeah, I noticed that. Thanks. What are you even saying? You're just pointing out. You see that tree? Yeah, I see that tree. Huh? Isn't that some kind of tree?
I'll be here all night.
So what's the
Because some
connection?
people really do that. Like, there's a lot of comics that I see, like, probably nobody you've ever heard of, and maybe you never will hear of, but they're little planted on so many little shows that you do, where all they're doing is trying to bring up some nostalgia to win over the crowd, like
Funyuns.
Mm.
right, or some like some reference from Mario Brothers, or like these are, I call them the reference comics. They're just like really, you just look in the back of the book and you can see like, all the references, you know.
It's like the
So,
clickbait of comedy. So
yeah, they're just now they're not even saying "Do you even notice?" They're just saying, "Remember?"
So you're calling inauthenticity on that.
What's that?
You're calling inauthenticity on that, right? But at what point do you stop
No,
being worthy?
it's not about inauthenticity. It's just about poor joke writing. You know, it's not. It's not even really a joke. I feel like it's kind of a trick. It's
So,
like
so what's the musical equivalent of this? Just to bring that back, like that's how I feel when I hear a lot of just if I go to a bar and I hear a blues
Yeah.
band, like why are you doing that? Are you only doing that just because blues is, even if it's regurgitated a million times, if somebody's doing it in front of you, and they're doing it with some feeling, then you can get into it. And even if there's not that much feeling, you kind of feel like, oh, now I'm in the blues mode. I'm enjoying. And they'll use the word any band or genre where they use the name of the genre many times. It's something I'm always suspicious of.
Wait, what about funk?
Funk it up. We're gonna rock you, and actually sing about you. Like that seems almost the same thing. Like I'm playing power chords and I'm saying the word rock, and that'll make you think of rock and how much you like the rock that's better than the rock that I'm singing right now.
you know, jazz has never really been guilty of that. Nobody's ever said we're gonna jazz you, right?
jazz.
Oh, we're gonna jazz you now.
Manhattan Transfer. There's some very tacky kinds of jazz that probably do that. Yes.
The whole audience is getting really jazzed by this jazz.
And I guess if you have like a beat poet fronting you, jazz band or something, maybe. Like, yeah.
You never hear a jazz musician. Can you feel the jazz?
Yeah, but that even but that's I feel like it's even hard to. I don't think that happens. Well, okay, it happens in blues, but that's so rock. You know what I mean? Is calling attention to the actual experience.
No,
It's
but
like,
the blues, we're singing the blues. That's why I'm singing
that's
the
a good point.
blues. And there's so many blues songs. Like Mark said, they
Yeah.
also point out, by the way, this is sad. This is the blues.
So since we're getting back to the genre
Interesting.
stuff, which was one of the concerns on the discussion about authenticity, I want to hear more from Chris, because Chris, so you were actually responsible, or at least chiefly responsible for those gypsy instrumentals, right? For the early stuff.
Yeah.
Like,
And
they were known as a genre band of a punk band that's playing gypsy
kind of.
music.
And a lot of the attempts, in those early recordings were we were, the term genre bending is just bandied about to death these days. But it was a conscious thing on our part. Like, on that first album we were doing, sort of countrified acoustic versions of Circle Jerk songs, and then doing punked out versions of country songs, and then and so on. And so we were, that it was not as common, in 1985 and before. But and then I was thinking about I was listening to a lot of medieval music and thinking about fiddle stuff, and so those were the tunes that were floating around in my head. And actually, David was coming up with a lot of similar things too, and the sort of the band the proto camper band, which was known as Sitting Duck, and
I thought Box of Laughs. I thought I was up on
Box of Laughs was a different trip altogether, and it's funny too because there was a moment there where we thought Box of Laughs was getting a lot, and we thought that was going to be the band that that would tour and make records and stuff, and that it was one of those personality things where everyone was so scattered, no one could get it together to stay organized enough to pull a lot of that stuff off. But the project with those early camper records was very consciously to bring in these influences that were not rock, and mess with them and apply them in this sort of slightly, you know, punk rock was really, you know, that first wave of it was already kind of done. It was pretty much done by the mid '80s, and so we felt free to spoof that too. And so a lot of it was, there was a lot of humor behind those intentions, I think, and also, but also seriously musical. Like, we wanted to play those melodies and make them sound good, and we were practicing our instruments and trying to get better on them, and so we were keeping, in order to kind of, it was a combination of applying those influences and trying to bring them together, but also we were keeping the song short, you know, keeping things kind of sort of the punk ethos about like short songs, you know, like get in, do it, get out, kind of, you might say. And so all those things were coming together in that moment, and bringing these sort of folk, like East European folk fiddle influences were just another. It was another curveball that we enjoyed trying.
So it seemed like on the discussion, Jonathan at least seemed a little appalled in retrospect that that you were doing the what he called the uncanny valley thing, that the approach to just being eclectic, just being genre hopping, that there was something shallow about that they both had some contempt for now, or I wasn't exactly sure with that. I mean, was I misreading that, or do you share any of that disdain for your younger
I don't
self?
know.
Or I think it's great. I like
I
that. I
don't,
still use
because
that.
yeah, I mean, I don't, because I was having fun with it. And so I didn't have those, again, I never had concerns about being, I never had concerns about authenticity. It was fun to me to mash all that stuff up. And, and it worked for audiences. I don't know if I would, so actually I am working on, I'm working on some new music for grown-ups right now after a long time of not working on it, like a solo record project. But it's just train of thought just totally derailed.
Sorry. I totally agree with that, though. I mean, if you're having fun doing it, why should you worry if somebody might think it's inauthentic? I mean, who gets hurt if you're mildly inauthentic?
Well, and again, in that, I think there was an historical moment there. I think where we were at the time we were there, there, it was kind of like making weird puns. Like there was, it was a moment where it was probably more effective to do that because there wasn't a lot of that going on, so much, and so. And I think that's part of the reason Camper, frankly, honestly, I do talk to people who still think the first album is their favorite because of there's a whimsical quality to it that people respond to, and I think that was, I honestly think that was a big part of why Camper took off, because there was this element of playfulness about it that. In the midst of all the, sort of the punk rock, hardcore, thrashy stuff, I think people responded to that. People responded to the sort of tongue-in-cheek taking. We were very serious about not taking ourselves seriously, which can also get out of hand. And I think it kind of did later on, but in those early moments, I think audiences will respond.
So you're kind of responding to Danny's question earlier about the parody songs. How can you have parody songs if you don't have a centralized culture that everybody knows the stuff? You can do parodies off of stuff that is just style. People recognize this is
right.
Eastern European. I don't really know any Eastern European pop songs, but I still recognize a spoof of an Eastern European pop song when I hear one.
It's funny how these songs became
we weren't.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Chris.
We weren't, quoting specific tunes for the most part, but it was style, and people do recognize things on that level, So, you can not be familiar with a lot of that music, but it's snuck in. It's it's in the air enough that you identify these folks on the fiddle with a particular culture, and we have enough cultural, enough semiotic kind of baggage, if you will, to put that together. And so that was enough for us. We didn't have to quote specific tunes.
Yeah, I would argue, I think in a lot of ways combining genres, especially if there are genres that influence you or genres that you just really like, finding a synthesis for those is very authentic. A lot of my favorite bands are notorious for that, just combining different elements that you wouldn't think would go together, but you're kind of taking things that already exist but shaping it into something new.
Right.
And I think a lot of what we've talked about, it seems like there might be a confusion between originality and authenticity, where I would argue it's probably much harder to be original, but it's almost like saying that someone's not authentic. It would be kind of hard to judge that. It's saying like someone doesn't really believe something. So really, you can only be the arbiter of your own authenticity, and hopefully, if it's genuine, other people will see that. But
and having said all that stuff, it's whenever I see band bios or ad copy that talks about bands and they use the term genre bending, it's like yawn. I mean, who doesn't? Everybody
Right.
is taking influences from someplace else, and so let's let's hear what you got. Genre bending doesn't as such doesn't mean much. Everybody's doing it necessarily.
Genre bending and gender bending are so close. I wonder if there's gender genre bending. I have a note when I listen to the episode of gender genre. I have a note from.
That's what I do.
Yeah.
Right on.
Here's another random note I have from when I listen to the episode. Some of my notes, Mark, are good for intellectual discussion, and some of them are just not.
Either one.
Do go
It's fine.
Uncanny Valley sounds like a great name for a dairy company. There you go. That's it.
I actually just wrote a song called Uncanny, which is on my mind the whole time I was listening. So, yeah.
We have the freshest cheese here in Uncanny Valley. It's uncanny how fresh our milk products are.
It creeps you out in a psychologically inconsistent way.
Well, this might be a good place to bring him. So one of the we sort of talked about lyrics a little on the episode, and both lyrically and as Chris was just talking about in the style of the music itself, how humor gets incorporated or irony that seems to add a wrinkle in the whole authenticity thing. That purposefully, just the idea of is my joke telling authentic or not? Like seems a little strange. The way you just described it, Danny, like, well, I'm telling, observations about my day, and, so I can make sense of it like that. But in terms of, funny lyrics for songs, I guess, there are a couple of ways to do it. I mean, you could do it sort of like you're talking about with the joke telling, that you're just expressing personal stuff that's going on, but you're expressing it in a witty way. So that sort of adding the non sequiturs or the funny images or metaphors or whatever is another way of spicing up something. Another thing that I really like in music is when, like, you've got really happy music, but the lyrics are as depressing as shit.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And that actually that's
Just
humor,
describe
but
country music.
that's often funny, but it also reflects my actual experience of when I'm miserable, like, this just sucks, just kind of having that emotional complexity is actually authentically part of the experience.
Sure.
On the other hand, one of the great things about using humor in music is that it doesn't even have to necessarily be funny. If you're just saying it to people, if you get up on stage and are telling jokes, like unless you're really established, monologuist and people will listen to you whether you're being funny that moment or not. But sort of the baseline expectation is that you're being funny, you're telling jokes from moment to moment. But if you take like They Might Be Giants, known or Camper Van Beethoven, known for incorporating funny stuff into their lyrics, but I know with They Might Be Giants in particular, they didn't want to label themselves a parody songs or not parody song. They just part of the innovation there was to not label it, was to self-consciously, like, are we being really artsy? Are we being silly? Or just write a song about the purple toupee or whatever. And and there's something that distinguishes that from Weird Al, or that's being self-consciously
Yeah, it's like
erotic.
the difference between
Yeah.
like Frank Zappa and
Yeah.
Weird Al almost.
Yeah.
Frank Zappa, definitely one of the guys that started that.
Yeah.
Rule.
Excellent
Yeah.
point of reference.
And he has
Um,
an album, I think, Does Humor Belong in Music? Is the name of one of his compilations. There's a lot of people.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on the general topic?
Zappa is, I think, a really good pivotal figure for a number of reasons. I think a lot of times when we're talking about authenticity, this is going to be a bit rough, but we're talking about a vaguely kind of modernist idea of reflecting the truth. And it could be an individual truth, it could be a social truth, but it's, being there with the truth. Zappa consistently is, and a lot represents for a lot of composers and a lot of like art historians or whatever, a real paradigm of postmodernity, which he's mashing up doo-wop with stupid terrible lyrics with like Stravinsky, which is it's just supposed to, this collapse of the high and the low, and this mashing of serious thoughts and shit-eating grin irony that's supposed to by the time you end when I end like an early Zappa record, when he still has these elements together, because later on in his career he kind of separates the serious music in a way from like the jokey kind of schlocky stuff. But I like the early Zappa when it's all mashed together. I think this weighs in the mind of a lot of songwriters, that if they try to be serious and confessional and speak directly to the audience, a lot of audience members are going to just roll their eyes, be like, I've heard this sincere appeal before. This is like someone handing out, like, I don't know, it's you can't fool me. I know what you're trying to do.
I'm just picturing an audience member standing up and saying, "I've heard this sincere appeal before. I do not approve of your performance."
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Another, oh, you want to kill yourself? Yawn. Like it's like no matter how intense it is, no matter how human the experience is, no matter how hard you try to articulate it, people are just not there for it. In fact, they're probably there to escape their own deep feelings in some way. Whereas irony, or at least this post-irony, where you're kind of mashing up sincerity and things that you directly don't mean, it allows, it's kind of semiotically thick. You can interpret it in a number of ways. Like, I can listen to Zappa with like a libertarian who agrees with Zappa and a communist who hates Zappa's politics, and they can both sit there and laugh together. You know what I'm saying.
On another note, 100 years from now, Weird Al's music's going to be considered serious.
Yeah, I don't doubt it.
Yeah, I think a good modern example of that, at least for my taste, is Father John Misty. I don't know if anyone else here has heard any of his work, but he came from more of a singer, songwriter, folk, troubadour kind of background, and basically tried to reinvent himself with this persona of doing exactly that, trying to figure in a lot of humor and irony and absurdity to but that is the shtick. Like, you can take it serious, but it's also a joke. And
so like the Folkman, like Spinal Tap, is that what
kind of like that, yeah. If like he had a great performance on Letterman, I think it was earlier this year, where it was real serious. He had a whole string quartet playing in the background, and he's sitting at this grand piano and just being real serious. And the song is called "Bored in the USA," and it's basically a social satire on American culture. But and then you find out that the piano is playing itself, and then he starts like rolling around on the piano, but the words are really satirical and really they have a really good punch, but he doesn't take it too serious. And yeah, I think there's a huge appeal, at least for me, for that. Gives you a lot of layers to dig through. So.
Well, I want to hear Mike address this, because I think the reason that Mike and I did not actually play in a band together, at least for more than one gig in college, was that he didn't like my cheesy ballads. All your stuff had the humor element going on. But you're muted, Mike.
Yeah, okay, and now I'm unmuted. I've found, like, there's only so much humor in music that I can actually tolerate. You can only use small doses. Like, I can't sit down and listen to a whole They Might Be Giants album, right, from beginning to end. Or, I don't know, I just find it wears out its welcome a lot more quickly than sincerity actually does, or even just be obnoxious or something like that. Where trying to be clever is something that to me just wears out its welcome more and more as I get older. It's like, you know, you've heard clever things before. You know, it was clever when you were 15 or 16 and listening to They Might Be Giants. It's less clever now. And I mean, I don't mean to shit all over the whole like humor and music thing, but it can be overdone. And after a while, it just gets to be too much.
Which sounds especially ironic coming from you, given that I recall your turkey leg song or whatever.
Yeah. No, I couldn't listen to more than 2 or 3 of my own things right now. So, yes, I'm not excluding myself from this whole mess.
Adrian, any comments on humor in the classical music world? Those wacky violinists?
The only one I know of is PDQ Bach, and that's very funny the first time you listen to it, and then it's just really weird if you listen to it more than that. So that's about all I have to say about that.
Well, so that does bring up my problem with some of the Zappa stuff is that it's too much of a performance, a one-time. You know, it's like a stand-up routine. That most stand-up routines you hear once, and then you laugh at the jokes, and then you don't really want to hear that again. Like there are certain ones that are maybe ritualistic. If you're hearing George Carlin do the 7 dirty words or whatever, it's okay that you know the routine in advance. But, you know, I'm sure there are plenty of things like that. But so if the humor is something that relies on surprise, then it's not, of course, going to work in a medium that's meant to be listened to over and over and over again. And that's at least personally a fundamental way that I take pop music. That I don't even get, you know, I don't even hear lyrics the first time. I know I already said this on the episode. That I have to hear the thing over and over and over again. So if humor is going to be involved, it has to be, you know, I actually think for the most part, They Might Be Giants, especially their more recent stuff, is subtle enough about it that I don't mind hearing it over and over and over again in the way that I would not want to hear a Weird Al song over and over and over again. Or maybe even if I did want to hear the Weird Al song, it would be because of the music aspect of it. It would sort of be in spite of the lyrics. I ignore the lyrics if I like it that much. Although then I would probably just go back and listen to the original thing that he's satirizing. So I guess that also speaks to the issue of, you know, what I have against live performance. I know that it's my own personal peccadillo that I feel more comfortable. I'm just a homebody, and so I'd rather be able to create my product like a movie director or a composer and put it all together and get it out there. Than, you know, I've had some very energetic, fun performing experiences, but I've never like done it every day for months in the way that that Chris, I'm sure, did in that stretch.
Sure.
But yeah, it seems that if you were doing something, you know, like it seems like it would be much. I know some people, like whenever there's a band that the guitarist is too good in it or whatever, and ends up leaving. I remember the guy when a jazz player ventures into rock, and they'll say like, oh, I couldn't stay in that band for more than a year. I couldn't stand playing those same damn songs again and again. I mean, do you get that? Like certainly I would just have enough songs in my repertoire that I that I would not get bored that way. Hopefully, and comparing that with the experience of a touring comedian, I can't even imagine what it would be. I guess I see the joy in sort of honing your timing and working on your
Right.
craft and developing stuff. And anyway, any comments on any of that?
Yes. I mean, I'm just saying yes. You're right. It's all about honing the timing and hitting the beats and seeing if there's a more succinct way to get to your punchline or playing with the wording,
That's
languages.
where the artistry comes in when you're doing
Yeah.
something like that. And there are certain aspects of that that only repetition can give you. You can only do that. You can only do that kind of work, like even rehearsing or practicing some experiences, trying things in front of audiences, and and confronting that, and plus interacting with an audience. Audiences are always different. Performing situations are always different. So that gives you something, and if you need to enjoy that in the first place. It's something you need to want to do, and lots of people do, and a number of people don't. And so that's fine. So I don't know, they're two really, performing and recording are two really different processes. Even if even if it's ostensibly the same music. I enjoy them both. So I kind of keep them separate to some degree in my mind, as being.
I guess I feel like that when you're doing something, you have to feel like there's a reason for this new thing that you're adding to the world to exist. So it could just be that I've never been in front of this particular audience before. They have not seen this particular performance, this message that I'm putting out, and so I can do the same exact show. Like if you're putting on a musical or something, maybe it's your 9th week, your 26th week, if it's a very successful Broadway show, and you're doing the same freaking thing, but it still might be very satisfying that you're still creating this energy and you're putting it out to a new group of people. And again, even music is the kind of thing that you can repeat anyway. It's ritualistic, and so you still might get just as much joy. I know that when I've done the same songs, I remember my wife making fun of me for, like, in rehearsal, often singing melodies to songs that I've been doing a few years, and just completely, like, the melody's almost unrecognizable because I just, like, would get too bored with myself and just sort of start mixing it up. Like, and I would imagine even with I don't know, Take the Skinheads Bowling, the lyrics sound like they were
Right.
made up on the spot. Is that one that he would change it from performance to performance of what exactly was in the third verse?
No, oh no, oh no.
Never. Okay.
Well, I mean, there were little variations, but Skinhead.
Yeah.
Take Skinhead's Bowling was. I mean, we dared not change it too much. I mean,
Well,
because
before it got
that
popular.
brings up the other thing. Like, even as a listener, repetition can be important.
Yeah.
And actually, the few live performances I've been doing recently, we've covered Skinheads and done this really slow, sort of twee acoustic version of it, and it's actually it's fun to sing again that way. But it's even as a listener, I mean, you were talking earlier about how you listen to something and you focus on maybe the instruments, you focus on the overall sound of the song for several listens before you start paying attention to the words. And again, like repetition, and part of this is coming from working with young children, and where repetition is absolutely crucial to learning and development. And the kids want to hear and experience things over and over again because their understanding changes with every iteration of the experience. And that's not. It's still true as adults. I mean, we listen to how many times have you had an album that you just obsess over, or a song that you want to hear over and over again? And it's part of it can't all be about getting something new out of it, although it's certainly possible to do, and there's a certain amount of truth to that. But also, you just want to hear it again. You just want to have that experience again. And so, if you're you do get tired of doing stuff too much, and you do need to change it up. But there's something about just our experience of music um, that is satisfying with repetition. I think, which is and that applies on the level of a piece or a song, and also on the level of a type of music. Like we know all the, you can listen, if you're a blues fanatic, you know all the tropes, you know the notes, you can sing them, you've got them in your head, but you want to hear different artists play it their way. That's part of it's part of how we experience music. The repetition has a value in and of itself.
I think I was just exemplifying the very thing I was criticizing earlier about artists being too focused on the artist's perspective. The fact that I'm bored of it as an artist, that when Bob Dylan, if you ever see him live, plays unrecognizable versions of his songs because he cannot play those freaking songs from 1965 the same way, and audiences don't actually like that much. They'd really kind of like to know what song it is that you're playing before you get 2 minutes into it, if this is one of their old favorites. So it's a little self-indulgent on his part. I still...
Some of them were unrecognizable in the 60s, too.
I was at a show in Athens a few weeks ago, and it was after the encore, so the singer came back out without the band, and the crowd was pretty anxious, and he was like, I'm going to try and play some old songs, but you guys can't sing, because I don't remember how the original melody went, and you'll throw me off. So he was basically had to have them sing very quietly to these songs that the people knew every word and melody to, but that was funny. But I think there is a threshold in terms of, I guess, the creator and then the audience. I know for me, in high school and college, when I was playing in a lot of rock bands, we would play around town at all the local bars and music venues, and toured a tiny bit, and locally. And but it does get to a point, if at least for me, for us, got to the point where if you're not playing to a larger, a growing audience, I think it'd be a different thing if it's a semi-well-known band. I have friends that tour and do music for a living, and that's all they do is just tour, here and other countries and just nonstop, and so they grow a base over. But I never had the patience for that, so for me, it just wasn't really worth it to play the same venues every few months, and I'd rather just sit in my room and record stuff. Or even
don't
playing.
People do that just because the idea of a day job is so awful, and that even touring around and playing and having to be in hotels and all the kind of downside of the touring life is still better than the day jobs they think are available to them. What are you doing right now? What is it? Can we ask you?
Me personally?
Yes.
I do IT work. So I'm an IT coordinator for a healthcare company, and I've been doing that for about the past 8 years. But there was a point where I thought what I wanted to do was just create music and try to get it out there to people and tour, until I realized how much work would go into it, especially now with some friends that I have that do that for a living, and their job is way harder than mine would ever be, even though they don't have to do the regular 9 to 5. But driving to a different state or city every day, your whole day is in preparation for a show, setting up all the business angles of it, with the venues and merch and management and finding somewhere to sleep, having your stuff stolen, not making enough money to barely live off of. They still have to have, part-time jobs when they're off tour. But I really respect people that can do that, and even discussions I've had at some of those house shows with musicians who have been doing their thing since, for 20, 30 years now. These days, that's pretty much what you have to do, is just tough it out. I know David Bazan, who I've seen a number of times at the house shows, he has to tour 2/3 of the year, just to make enough money, because there's just no record sales anymore.
Just didn't make enough money for the heroin required to do touring or the cocaine.
Yeah.
Chris, it seemed like so with your teaching and stuff, you've
Sure.
reached a nice point of equilibrium that you can do the music and
Yeah. I mean, I was determined. Well, I'm not really prepared to do something not musical, but I was determined to make my way through music somehow, and teaching's been a good way to sustain that.
They say when you teach. I'm sorry. I was going to say one of the best ways to learn is to teach. They say, right?
Indeed, yeah, it definitely keeps you in touch with kind of the first principles of what you're trying to do, and so
if you forget ta ta ti ti ta,
right. Oh yeah,
you got that down now.
I got it down. I got that down. But I mean, there are definitely things about there are things about working, making my own music work for me more that I miss, and I'm kind of striving to go more in that direction these days. I think what we've been talking about the last few minutes definitely begs a lot of questions about the economics of music now, and you have so much is available for free, and musicians don't get paid, while the companies that mediate all this stuff, as a CEO and 20 or 30 programmers are raking it in. That's I definitely share the anger that that Jonathan and Victor talked about before. I think it's really these are really difficult times for people who work very hard to create music, and there's kind of more options, but you really have to be cagey about it. And if you're trying to do a band thing, it can be very, very, very. And I think a lot of it, there's a lot of like the upward, that sucking sound, all the wealth going up, towards people who already have it, really going to where money is. And that's definitely a problem. It's increasing, and it's and so it's tough. I mean, I've circumvented a lot of that stuff by doing the teaching thing and sustaining myself that way. I would like to. I'm working now actually to make more time to do my own work. But yeah, I definitely feel fortunate. I feel like I've been able to strike some good balance. So.
Some of my last bands.
I don't too much about it.
I'm too old now, and it's hard to find people in their mid-40s or whatever who are still looking to be in bands. But speaking as a person 10 years ago, at least, I played a lot with a lot of former professionals. So there were a lot of people that did the touring lifestyle, got burned out, and now are just have their day jobs, and so they'd be happy. They don't need money from the music. They already have got that taken care of. So they'll come and play, with their professional quality chops, my shitty gigs that don't pay anything. So like I feel like we're all kind of together in misery. I could probably, the only thing stopping me from getting a bassoon player to play on my next song is just that I haven't bothered to do the outreach to find a bassoon player. It's not that I think that I would have to pay the bassoon player. Even just giving the bassoon player $30 would be like, oh wow, I actually made money off of music today.
Right.
Unless it's one of those people that is still trying to be a professional musician and like just has to feel like, if I'm gonna play a note, I better fucking get paid for it because this is what I have to do. This is the only way I'm making my living.
Right.
And everybody else has given up.
Yeah. Well, and it was kind of with my thing, like with those kids records, I paid the musicians, and I paid for. That was kind of, those two records. That was kind of the last time I was actually in a proper recording studio. And I do everything on my Mac now, but with gear at home. But I did hire drummers and bass players and so forth to do a lot of the things that I wasn't doing myself. And I had this nice little synergy with my teaching work in that, the families that I was seeing, the kids I was seeing and their families, they were my audience, and so they were buying my records. And so for a little while there, I didn't have to do much marketing. I had done it already, kind of in the way that bands tour. I had my students. So, and of course, that's a way to go. There are lots of artists who were, Dan Zanes is kind of the most successful example. He had this, he was in a band, college radio darlings in the 80s, and then he had kids, and he had to figure out something else, some other way to do things, and so doing music for kids ended up being a really good way for him to keep on. And on a smaller scale, I did the same thing.
And it certainly doesn't seem, inauthentic for doing something that's sort of almost a utilitarian, not the purpose that one would expect. You're saying, I gotta write songs. Well, I get up in the morning to write songs. Then sort of doing children's music sounds like it's sort of a sellout gig from that perspective. But clearly, that's not how Dan Zanes, it's exactly in the pocket for him.
Right, and it wasn't that for me either, because I actually care about working with children, and I enjoy that work, and I care about education, and so it's on my mind a lot. So it ties in really well.
People at the gig that will pay attention. They won't just be off smoking and talking to their friends.
They will.
Well, and making them not talk to their friends.
Yeah. And the hours are different, but a lot of the same skills and the same lick. A lot of the same licks I would anyway. So, and I know a lot of the people who turn to doing music for kids, kind of see the same value in it. Feel the same way, and it's like I don't have to go to smelly bars. I'm doing making a lot of the same noise, same kinds of noise, only at a lower volume, so I can still hear at the end of the gig. So it's another variation. I mean, music is a huge thing. There are lots of ways to do it, and the whole band touring paradigm. If those are drawbacks for you, there are other ways to go about it. If you want to, so I know a lot of really good musicians too who have their day jobs and they keep playing. They're happy, so good on them.
Since we were talking about They Might Be Giants before, I got to say, so that's another band. They did a bunch of children's albums that because I had kids that were that young at the time that those were coming out, I heard a lot of times, and I got to say that they're some of their best stuff is their children's albums, because it was sort of like the lyrics are not going to matter. The lyrics are about the friggin' ABCs, okay? Just deal with that. But then just musically, they could just kind of do crazier, more interesting arrangements, or just more, like, I don't have to worry about being original. If you're trying to impress yourself as an adult and impress your adult audiences, then, you don't go for just the happiest, most awesome thing you can think of. You kind of feel like you need to skew it to be cutting edge in some way. And the fact that when they were able to drop their defenses and do that, is some of their best stuff.
Yeah, there's a great Portlandia skit about that, where there's this really children's musician, and it cracks me up every time, and so they want to start their own children's band. And the music was absolutely fantastic. So, But, I have a good friend that actually one of the guys, he played bass on a few songs on my last record, but he does the same thing. He teaches music for children, and he loves it so much. Ever since he stopped doing more of the touring and constant gigging around and stuff, he much prefers that.
Yeah, so there are different ways to strike a balance with all that stuff. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, you find your way,
Well, I think it sort of gets you don't have the authenticity Olympics when you're making music for children. Yeah, you are just exposing them to a kind of pure joy of music, and whatever educational content you're going to put in there. But you just it's more for enjoyment, and maybe on a certain level that's like this is going to sound a little goofy, but you're not trying to represent anything authentic. You're just kind of going for something, and that's there's something true about that. There's a deeper truth that you're not going to be able to represent in terms of authenticity, but it is authentic.
Well, I think when you see it, too, I know I like to play music for my 3-year-old niece, and when you see the reaction they can get for just an unfiltered, unjaded representation of just experiencing music, even if I'm just playing, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star on my classical guitar or something, but to them it's, it really does. I think even in that sense there's authenticity, even if not from the creator, but definitely from them receiving it.
Can you imagine snobby kids?
Twinkle Twinkle Little Star was better the first time.
Yeah. Well, and so and I look to that experience a lot. I mean, I think those kinds of interactions that, to me, are examples of really art. Even among adults, and that's our basic need for music. I mean, music is very, very old. It's almost a lot of thought nowadays. Activity in our species is almost as old as language, not as old. It's like the first known bone flute that was dug up predates the Lascaux paintings by 20,000 years. So, if that was, if the oldest known bone flute is 40,000 years old, how much more time had to pass before that was there musical thought before someone said, "In these flutes, I can get these sounds that I want. In this bone, I can get these sounds that I want." So, I often when people get spin out about ideas around just to spin out about troubles about making music and the economics of it and so forth, I go back to that that kind of experience with kids, because this is what we do, is sharing music. This is something that's really, really basic, and it can be complex, it can be simple, but it's something that human beings do. And I know not just human beings. I think it's a shared thing among a lot of creatures. A lot of creatures do things that can reasonably be considered music, whatever, irrespective of the other purposes that it makes. Music serves a lot of purposes in human beings too. So.
Far too many of my songs are aimed at and sung to my pets, and I don't think they appreciate it. I don't think they give it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. But I love like stories like this is when Camper was touring, and we stayed with this couple who were, we visited them. They were coming to a bunch of our shows, and they lived in Canada. And they were kind of chasing us around. Oh, it was. We were opening for REM for a month. This was way back in '86, and they had they tell us a story that they were just like avid, constant listening to music and videos, and had vast libraries of things, and they had a tortoise in their house that they kept as a pet, and of course, reptiles. A tortoise.
Okay, not a TARDIS.
And
all right.
Reptiles don't have reptiles. No. Yeah, a lot of reptiles. They're very sensitive to vibrations, but they don't. They don't have ears the same way we do. So, but this tortoise, when they played the music loud, this tortoise would stick its neck out and rest its chin when it heard certain songs, and so.
Aww.
Yeah. So.
And if he didn't like him, he'd put his head back in his shell out of pure snobbery.
So what kind of, it begs all kinds of questions about how basic these kinds of activities are. I was going somewhere else with this, but
I can feel your vibes in my shell, man. That's good.
Yeah. No, so that's when I work with kids, it helps me kind of keep track of just the um, basics about music making, and and what a great thing it is, and it's I can kind of strip away some of the layers. If I'm bummed out about some of these other questions that we wrestle with, as important as they are to wrestle with, it's good to just remember that this is just something that we do, and something that we can share.
I think what we learned from this is that if you want to know if a song is good or not, you play it for a tortoise.
Free tortoise, yeah. So
Yeah.
they're all about the bass. Man. They're all about the bass.
It's the tortoise tuning system.
Yeah.
I have a tortoise here at my place.
Yeah.
Yeah, right on.
I don't. I
Jokes
get
on the
tries.
toilet, boys?
Yeah, I run the material by him, and
Yeah. You know, what if your animals have different tastes? Like I remember I had 2 dogs, when I was growing up. One of them was all about the bass, and when I would play some like reggae or something, he would go like sit and like sleep next to the subwoofer. And whereas I had another dog who was really into harmony. And so one time I played, Christmas morning, I got Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys, and I played Pet Sounds, and no pun intended. This dog just went up.
All puns allowed.
Yeah, but I can't make this up. The dog like literally, instead of just being a dog, went up to the computer that I was playing out of, and just like was sitting directly in front of the computer, like his master's voice. The HMV diagram with the dog sitting in front of the gramophone, sitting in front of my MacBook Pro, just like staring into the computer. Like, so my dog said different taste in music.
Brian Wilson fan.
Yeah, harmonies.
Adrian Cho, any comments about dog taste in opera?
Well, what Chris was saying about everyone's talking about the kids' music and lyrics not having to really mean anything. Well, I feel like that's true of my experience of classical music in the sense like, right, Mozart Requiem is Requiem, right? Like all the text is Requiem for the most part, and a lot of classical music is just non-representational. And that's something that appeals to me really strongly. I don't know. I don't want to say it's like a purely musical experience, but I don't know. Yeah.
Say it.
Well, it's
purely
interesting
musical.
how that relates to the kids thing, because how you get kids into classical music, it's not that they can just enjoy the pure musical experience. Like, you got to say, oh, it's Vivaldi's The Four Seasons. Like, this is winter.
True.
This is the one about the boat, and this is the one about the stormy sea, and
Well, and I think I'd back up a little bit on that. So it's not that lyrics don't matter, but I think it's they're capable of relating to things in a lot of different ways. In a open way, that's very much do matter, and I think there's a lot of connection between music and language.
Right.
That's really important to kids. And one of the great ways to get them relating to the music is through story, and which also I think harkens to something basic, in everybody. So that's where opera exists. That's people tell story. That's why there are story songs. Ballads, all those things come together.
I always thought, Chris, that one of the reasons the Beatles are still as popular as they are is because of the story that surrounds them.
I think a lot of sure.
Mm-hmm.
Music is never only sound.
No. I wasn't trying to say that it was. I agree. There's lyric can be really, really powerful. But yeah.
But I agree, Adrian, that when you immerse yourself, this is the thing that all the Schopenhauer and the Kant and all the guys we were reading were
Right.
on about, that you can really immerse yourself in a way that it's very different immersing yourself in a symphony that's only meant to be listened to once and is meant to be listened to in a live setting with these booming, these
Right.
you can't capture the harmonics of a full orchestra on a CD, unless you have a really good sound system.
Yeah.
Certainly not out of your MacBook Pro.
Yeah.
Totally different function, and so different structure of music than the pop song that you're meant to be able to carry around with you now.
Right.
Mike, maybe you could work out a way, Mike, for us to be able to capture it. I see the wheels turning.
Well, they're going to keep turning for a very, very long time. Better wheels are turned than mine.
Mike, do you have some closing thoughts for us from you to start on our last part of our journey here?
My closing thoughts is I'm just not going to worry about it. Actually, authenticity. It's
Yeah.
I think if I'm not the right kind of raw material to be inauthentic. I don't think. No, you have to have something to work with to be a truly inauthentic manufactured product, and that ain't me. So, and I think that's true for the vast majority of people too. Like we're not about to be sucked up by the machine because the machine doesn't want most people, right? It's so yeah, I'm not gonna sweat it.
Ain't me, babe. Oh, that ain't me.
What the
I'm
hell's
just.
Anyway, I'm not going to sweat authenticity. If somebody catches me being inauthentic, you can bust me. But yeah, that's my takeaway from all this.
Max, when you started talking about your dog going to the
Yeah.
computer, I just remember the way you said it. I wanted to start laughing because you're like, in that moment, my dog stopped being a dog and he went up to the computer.
Yeah.
And I thought you were going to say, and he started blogging about it. And he was like, this doesn't sound, this isn't as good as I hoped it was going to be. He went on some Beach Boy forums and he started saying it's inauthentic and it's unoriginal.
Yeah.
Yeah, talk about that newly recorded version of "Smile" I own, Brian Wilson, with no Beach Boys on it besides him. I don't know. I don't know, man. Chase, any closing thoughts?
Not necessarily. I really enjoyed the episode. I thought a lot of good points were brought up, and yeah, it's good to see so many people in here too. It seems like a lot of us are on the similar wavelength here. So
I would say that
Max?
counts as a closing thought.
Go ahead. Oh, sorry. I thought someone was about to volunteer another closing thought. Max, do you have any last things?
Last things. I was really impressed by Schopenhauer and how much of my, kind of like teen angst, trying to understand why I cared so much about music, and this kind of connection to humanism and the universal human experience, like how much that spoke to me. And I was also relieved to hear that that lyric poetry was the lowest form of poetry. Because I used to write all kinds of poetry, and now I only write lyrics, and I am suspicious of poetry for some reason, and I almost feel like poetry itself without song is a bit obsolete, and that's weird, but there's
We'll have
something.
an episode on that in the future at some point. I'm
Yeah.
sure we'll.
Yeah.
I share that because it has the same non-musical. And now I'm doing the poetry reading. And it's very hard to change that tone because there's no music underlying it to change the tone. You need to have your little boombox or your triggered samples to go during the to make the fart noises or whatever during the poetry.
I can hear Mark already being like, the question of today's episode is something like, is poetry dead?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I just want to put out there that I don't know. I appreciate this sense that it's a deeper sense that we, this kind of humanist mode of music that is a big part of Enlightenment art. I feel like that there's something about that has passed us by that makes me sad as a humanist, but as a musician that's trying to make sense of my experience, that gives me some comfort.
And how about as a blogging dog?
As a blogging dog, I can say with confidence that the 40th anniversary remastering of Pet Sounds, completely different.
It's rough.
It's too compressed, and just
It's not just
give the
too
same
much
ambiance.
compression. It's a problem these days.
Yeah, just take away the compression, all the authenticity comes flooding back.
Yeah. So,
Adrian, Cho, any last thoughts?
Well, yeah. So mostly agreeing with with Mike about the authenticity thing. It's interesting to think about, but not something I'm terribly worried about as far as I'm concerned. Just keep doing what I do, I guess, and
Keep playing those major scales, those traditional tunes.
Oh, you gotta go
singing with
whole
your
tones.
voice instead of a
Yeah,
instead of a squawk box like a cutting edge musician would be. Instead of mounting a rake on your bass chord like Victor did at that show that I saw and whack it on stuff and make that your performance. As my closing thing, I will share an anecdote, which is that in composition school, I dabbled with majoring in composition in undergrad at Michigan, and one of the performances I did, I think maybe the first one, was I was also doing some continental philosophy in another class. So I did this piano thing. I couldn't play piano very well, but I would hit some chords and then read some of Hegel's phenomenology out loud because it just sounds so confusing.
Awesome.
And then the climax of the piece was I would just pull out like a hand puppet, like that was basically like a kid's like bathtub thing, and have it stare at the audience. Just stare at them in silence for a little while, and then have it slowly turn and bang its head on the piano while I then continue to read Hegel.
That's usually how I feel when I try to read Hegel. So
I love it.
Same reaction.
That's my highbrow side.
Wow. Gotta see more of that.
And I guess I'll give you my closing thought, which was you talked a little bit in the episode about the Buena Vista Social Club and how you theorized that it became popular just because how it felt. And well, I wanted to give you a little story about the Buena Vista Social Club. The first time I saw them, I saw them at the Corn Exchange in Cambridge, England. And it was the original singer who has since passed away. Mark, you might know the name. It was quite old, but anyway, I was like, man, I love Cuban music. But it turned out I don't love all Cuban music. It just was, it's a certain feeling which really resonated when I was listening to you guys talk about it, that they have that makes you kind of like, I'm not articulating this thought well at all, but it really did. It does make you feel something in a way that I thought they were the perfect example to bring up in the episode as a band that really makes you, the way the music feels. So why did you pick them?
Well, that was Victor's example, so I
Oh, right, that's
pulled
right.
that out. But it did resonate with me. No, but I think you're being feeling inarticulate about it is entirely appropriate, and we should, as all musical discussions end, admit that this theorizing is all post hoc, mostly bullshitty, and just be in the moment, man. Be in the moment.
I love it. All right, thanks everybody, and thank you, Mark. Thanks for another great episode.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for Chris Mala. And
Thanks for reaching out.
I will, on the blog post where I promote this, I will put links to everybody's band's music or whatever. So if I don't already have links, or email me the most current thing that you would want to be represented, and or that you just want to tell them.
I guess what I was trying to say is I really like the Buena Vista Social Club.
Okay, very good.
I think we can all agree. All right, guys.
All right,
So
bye
long.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.